Kyle Mercer was 23 when he married Denise Waller, a 55-year-old widow with 4 dead husbands and a garden full of secrets. 2 days later, Kyle vanished without a trace, leaving behind his phone, his wallet, and a chilling question that still haunts the town of Ashridge. What really happened inside that house? As detectives peeled back the layers of Denise's past, they uncovered a trail of missing men, hidden insurance policies, and a list of names, each one ending in death. This is the story of love turned lethal, and the bride who never intended a happily ever after. Kyle Mercer wasn't the type of man people talked about until he married Denise Waller. Then suddenly, he was all anyone in Ashridge could talk about. He'd lived a quiet, ordinary life until then. 23, wiry, with dark eyes that always looked tired. Kyle worked 6 days a week, fixing up old cars at Bender's Auto. He had no criminal record, no history of drama, no enemies, and no interest in fame. He barely dated, but that changed when he met Denise. She was nothing like him. Denise Waller, at 55, owned one of the oldest properties in Ashridge, a 3-story Victorian home that doubled as her antique store. Her presence was as imposing as her house. With high cheekbones, ash-blonde hair always pinned in place, and a wardrobe that never deviated from blacks and silvers, she looked like someone from a photograph too old to be real. People described her as elegant, guarded, and cold. Others whispered things about her past, none of it ever confirmed. The two met one rainy Sunday at a roadside flea market. Kyle was browsing rusted tools when Denise approached him. No one knew what was said, but from that day on, he started showing up at her shop. Soon after, he stopped going out with friends. He became distant, withdrawn, distracted. His best friend Tanner tried to joke about the relationship at first, but it quickly turned into concern. Kyle wasn't just seeing someone older, he was being swallowed by her world. What shocked everyone wasn't that they were together. It was that they were married within 6 weeks of meeting. There was no big ceremony, no family, no party, just a private exchange of vows in the overgrown backyard of Denise's estate. The grass was dying, the air was damp, and the few guests, mostly her acquaintances from the antique scene, claimed the groom looked nervous, maybe even afraid. After the ceremony, Kyle stopped returning calls. He deleted his social media. When Tanner dropped by the shop to talk, Kyle was polite but distant. "I'm happy," he said. "Things are just different now." That was the last time anyone outside the estate saw him alive. What made the story gain traction, what made reporters drive down into the sleepy town of Ashridge, with their cameras and questions, was the timing. 2 days, that was all it took for everything to collapse. Denise's call to police was short and emotionless. She told them her husband went out for a walk late at night and never returned. No further detail. She didn't sound panicked. She didn't cry. The only thing she asked was whether they would need access to the house. Officers arrived within the hour. Kyle's belongings were untouched. His phone was still charging on the nightstand. His wallet was on the kitchen counter with a crisp 20 sticking out, as if he'd been planning to buy something cheap. His boots were missing, so was his black hoodie, but there was no sign of a struggle. Nothing was broken, nothing appeared stolen. It was as if he had simply vanished. Word spread fast. People gathered near the edge of the estate, kept back by yellow tape and quiet officers. Reporters took pictures of the house. The local paper printed the story under the headline, "Groom Missing, Wife Silent." Inside the house, Denise stayed mostly in her upstairs room. She allowed police to walk the property, answered their questions with vague politeness, and kept returning to the same phrase, "I loved my husband. I don't know what happened to him." But beneath her calm exterior, questions were building, quiet and steady as footsteps in an empty hallway. Why had Kyle married so suddenly? Why had he cut himself off from everyone? Why was Denise already wearing black again? Ashridge had seen its share of secrets, but this story felt different. The search for Kyle Mercer began with quiet urgency. At first, the local police treated it like a routine missing person case. People go for walks. People leave. Maybe there had been an argument. Maybe he needed space. But the circumstances didn't make sense, and the longer they looked, the stranger it became. It was just after midnight when Denise claimed she noticed Kyle was gone. She told police he had walked out the back door for some air. No note, no phone, no jacket. Despite the October chill, She said he often took walks at night to clear his head. When asked why she hadn't called sooner, she said she thought he would return by morning. He didn't. By sunrise, the property was surrounded by squad cars. Officers spread out across the neighboring woods, combing every trail and dried-up creek bed. Volunteers joined the effort, walking in long lines through the trees with flashlights and radios. Dogs were brought in. Drones scanned the tree canopy, but there was nothing. No footprints, no discarded clothing, no blood. It was as though Kyle had been swallowed whole by the forest. The estate itself offered little help. Kyle's belongings remained untouched. His red pickup truck was still in the gravel driveway. Its engine was cold. His toolbox in the garage was still closed, labeled meticulously with faded masking tape. He hadn't packed a bag. He hadn't even taken his keys. According to everything left behind, Kyle had no intention of going anywhere. Detective Clara Reese, recently reassigned from a nearby district, arrived on the second day. She'd read the case file twice on the drive-in and already felt uneasy. It wasn't just the disappearance, it was the silence surrounding it. Denise had not called any of Kyle's friends. She hadn't contacted his estranged parents. She had only called the police, then waited calmly in the kitchen until they arrived. When Clara knocked on the door, Denise greeted her in a robe, holding a cup of tea. There were no signs of panic, no urgency. She offered answers, but always just enough. Yes, they had been happy. No, there had been no argument. Yes, he liked night walks. No, she had no idea where he would go. Clara took note of every word, but it was the woman's eyes that unsettled her. Cool, unmoved, watching everything. The media caught wind of the case quickly. A young man vanishing 2 days after marrying a woman more than twice his age was too strange to ignore. Headlines began spinning out theories. Was Kyle in trouble? Did he run away? Was foul play involved? Journalists gathered outside the estate, snapping photos through the trees, whispering about the woman behind the curtains. Tanner Wells was the loudest voice trying to cut through the noise. Kyle's disappearance wasn't random, he insisted. Kyle had been scared. He had doubts. He had told Tanner something didn't add up. He thought he found something. Tanner told reporters he wouldn't just leave, not like this. Still, with no body, no sign of violence, and no solid leads, the case teetered between suspicion and stalemate. Denise gave a carefully worded interview to a local news station, saying she only wanted her husband back. She looked directly into the camera, her tone smooth, her face composed. But viewers noticed something else. She never used Kyle's name. Then came the first strange break in the investigation. While canvassing the property's perimeter, a rookie officer found a single boot, half buried in mud, far from the path Denise claimed Kyle used. It matched the pair Kyle had worn at the wedding. The boot had no laces, its tongue was torn, and nearby there was a small smear of something dark on the bark of a tree, possibly blood. The area was cordoned off immediately. Samples were collected, the boot was bagged and taken for analysis. And just like that, the investigation changed. Kyle Mercer wasn't just missing anymore. Something had happened, something violent. But what, and why, and where was the rest of him? Those were the questions no one in Ashridge could stop asking. Tanner Wells knew something was wrong the moment he heard Kyle was missing. Not just wrong off, like a door left ajar in a storm. While the rest of Ashridge murmured about the odd marriage and the timing of the disappearance, Tanner's thoughts went somewhere dark. He'd known Kyle since they were kids. He knew how his friend acted under pressure, how he avoided confrontation, and how he never made a move without thinking it through. Kyle disappearing without his phone, his truck, or even a jacket. That wasn't just strange, it was impossible. 2 nights before the wedding, Kyle had shown up at Tanner's place without warning. He hadn't stayed long, just long enough to sit on the porch with his head down and his voice low. Something's off, he'd said. I found things that don't make sense. But he never said what. Tanner asked. Kyle shook his head. Not yet, he muttered. I need to be sure. Tanner tried to brush it off. He thought maybe it was cold feet. The age gap had drawn plenty of attention, and Kyle wasn't used to that kind of scrutiny. But then came the wedding. Small, rushed. No family invited. Denise didn't wear white. There were no photos shared afterward. It was like the entire thing had happened in a vacuum. Now with Kyle missing, Tanner couldn't shake the memory of his friend's last visit. The fear in his eyes, the quiet urgency in his voice. He went straight to the police, demanding to speak to whoever was in charge. That's how he met Detective Clara Rice. Clara listened closely, her pen barely moving as Tanner spoke. She was calm, composed, but Tanner noticed the way her eyes narrowed slightly when he mentioned Kyle's concern. When he told her about the things Kyle had found in Denise's office, Clara sat back in her chair. She asked if Kyle had ever said anything about Denise's past, anything specific. Tanner shook his head, just that he didn't think she was who she said she was. It wasn't enough to get a warrant, but it was enough to stir Clara's interest. She dug into Denise's background, looking for patterns, inconsistencies, anything that didn't fit. What she found sent a chill down her spine. Denise Waller had been married before 4 times, and each marriage had ended strangely. One husband had died in a supposed boating accident, but no body had ever been found. Another had vanished on a business trip. A third died in a house fire that was ruled accidental but left behind unanswered questions. The fourth had divorced her just months before his death from a sudden and aggressive illness. There were no direct charges, no open cases, nothing that tied Denise to any of the tragedy, but they piled up like shadows behind her. Tanner was stunned when Clara told him. Kyle had never mentioned any of it. That meant he likely didn't know, but maybe he had stumbled across something related. Maybe that was what had unsettled him. As the days passed, the pressure mounted. The police presence at the Waller estate increased. A quiet tension settled over the property, like a wire stretched too tight. Denise, still calm and carefully cooperative, offered no resistance to the increased scrutiny. She served tea to officers. She allowed searches of the garden and woods, always just within the limits of their current warrant. But there was something about her silence that unsettled Tanner more than screaming ever could. He started talking to anyone who had been close to Kyle in recent weeks, colleagues, neighbors, even customers at the auto shop. He was looking for anything, any clue his friend might have left behind, and then he found, in Kyle's locker at the garage, tucked inside a folded work shirt, was a torn envelope. Inside was a small photograph, an old family picture. Denise stood in the center, younger, but unmistakable. Her hand rested on the shoulder of a man who looked oddly familiar. On the back, written in faint pencil, were 3 words, "Not her husband." Tanner didn't know what it meant yet, but he knew one thing for certain: Kyle had been right to be afraid. Detective Clara Rice sat at her desk late into the night, the glow of her laptop casting shadows across the case files spread before her. Each document, each clipped newspaper article, each photo felt like a puzzle piece, and the image they were forming was nothing short of haunting. Denise Waller's past, long buried beneath layers of careful reputation and small-town charm, was unraveling, slowly, deliberately, and what lay beneath it was darker than anyone had imagined. She focused on the marriages, 4 names, 4 men, all gone. The first, Thomas Avery, married Denise in 19. He was found drowned in Lake Rookmere, just 8 months later. No signs of struggle, no autopsy beyond standard protocol. His death was ruled an accident. He had no family to press further. Clara flagged it. The second, Marcus Lyle, disappeared in 2001. His car was discovered abandoned on a rural highway 2 towns over. A missing person report was filed, but no trace of him was ever found. Denise claimed he had a history of depression. Case closed. The third, Patrick Doyle, married in 2006 and dead in 2009, supposedly in a fire that destroyed their home. Denise survived, unharmed, and collected a substantial insurance payout. The fire was attributed to faulty wiring. But Clara noticed something odd in the fire department's archived report: mention of accelerants found in the basement, but no follow-up investigation. It was dismissed as residual cleaning fluid. And the fourth, Victor Kincaid, divorced Denise in 2013 after just under a year of marriage. He cited emotional manipulation and financial secrecy in court records. 2 months later, he was diagnosed with a rare blood disorder, and died suddenly. There had been no autopsy at his family's request. It was too much to ignore. Clara laid out the marriages on a timeline. Every one of Denise's husbands had vanished or died under circumstances too convenient to be random, and every time she had benefited financially, socially, or by erasing someone who seemed to be getting too close. The pattern was unmistakable. Meanwhile, the search for Kyle continued, now focused more on the estate and the surrounding woods than ever before. With growing suspicion, the department began revisiting evidence with fresh eyes. The muddy boot found near the edge of the forest had come back from the lab with a blood match. Kyle's. That changed everything. It meant violence, it meant a crime, and with that confirmation, Clara submitted a formal request for a full property search warrant. Denise, however, was already adapting. She began to limit her appearances, she stopped answering media questions, she refused to leave the house unless escorted. When Clara came by for follow-up questions, Denise was still polite but visibly more guarded. The charm had shifted into control, an invisible but firm wall of resistance, yet not once did she express genuine panic over Kyle's disappearance. No signs of grief, no outbursts, only cool, calculated cooperation. Then came an unexpected tip. A woman named Marlene Donovan called the tip line anonymously, claiming she had once worked for Denise Waller just after Patrick Doyle's death. She quit after only 3 months, citing strange behavior. She didn't give much detail at first, but when Clara met her in person, the story spilled out. Marlene said she once saw Denise scrubbing a pair of men's boots at midnight in the garden, her hands stained red. When Marlene asked about it the next day, Denise laughed and said they were just old work shoes with rust. At the time, Marlene dismissed it, but when the news broke about Kyle's disappearance, she couldn't keep quiet. Clara added it to the growing pile of evidence, and one thing became clear: the closer Kyle had gotten to Denise, the more dangerous his position had become. Just like the others, the house, the garden, the old shed behind the estate, they all began to feel less like a home, and more like a trap, and Kyle, it seemed, had unknowingly walked straight into the center of it. The clock was ticking, the security footage was supposed to be routine, just a formality. Denise had handed over access to the estate's security system with a careful smile, confident there would be nothing to find. The files, she claimed, only recorded for a few hours at a time before automatically deleting themselves. Most of the footage from the night Kyle went missing had already been overridden. The cameras, after all, were outdated, installed nearly a decade ago for insurance purposes. But Detective Clara Reese wasn't convinced. She called in Lena Ford. Lena was a digital forensics expert, sharp-eyed, and unshakably focused. She had a reputation for finding evidence others missed, the kind that slipped through firewalls, corrupted files and broken timestamps. When she arrived at the estate, she said little to Denise and even less to the officers watching the perimeter. Her attention stayed fixed on the hard drive. The files were a mess, fragments of time, out of order, gaps in the feed, and long periods of blank screen. But Lena had seen worse. She dug deep, bypassing the software Denise claimed was too old to restore. What she found, buried in the raw data of the hard drive, wasn't long, but it changed everything. It was a silent, grainy clip, no more than 40 seconds long. The timestamp was scrambled, but Lena estimated it had been recorded around 12:45 a.m., the exact window of Kyle's supposed walk. The footage was from the back garden. It showed Kyle stepping outside, barefoot, wearing what looked like pajama pants and a hood. He walked slowly, almost hesitantly, as if unsure where he was going. Then he stopped. He turned, as if hearing something behind him. The shadows swallowed most of his figure, but his posture stiffened. A second figure stepped into frame, a tall, dark shape, moving. There was a struggle, brief and violent. Kyle fell. The other figure dragged his body out of view, and then, nothing. The footage ended there. It had no sound, no detail sharp enough to identify the attacker, but it was enough. Kyle had not walked off into the night. He had been taken. Lena handed the clip to Clara, who watched it 3 times in a row without blinking. The footage couldn't be used to make an arrest, not yet. The face of the attacker was never visible, and the lighting was too poor for a positive ID, but it shattered Denise's version of events. Clara returned to the estate immediately, this time with more force behind her presence. The mood had changed. Officers moved with quiet urgency. They didn't knock this time. They informed Denise they were expanding the investigation. She didn't argue. She only stepped aside, her face blank, her mouth tight. There was no sign of fear, only silence. While officers began combing through the house again, Clara made her way to the garden. She retraced the path Kyle had taken in the video, counting steps, scanning the ground. Something tugged at her, an instinct, a flicker of unease. The shed, it stood at the far edge of the yard, partly hidden behind a thicket of tangled vines. It looked like nothing more than an old gardening hut, sagging under years of weather. The door was unlocked,
the interior musty with damp earth and the scent of mildew. Inside, among rusted tools and cracked shelves, Clara noticed something that didn't belong, a section of the concrete floor that looked newer than the rest. The color was off, the texture too smooth. She called in a forensic team. Within hours the decision was made to break open the floor. Everyone waited as the concrete was cracked, peeled, and lifted in chunks. The sound echoed across the garden like bones breaking. When the final layer was removed, the officers fell silent. Wrapped in a blue tarp, buried beneath the concrete was a human body. Though decomposed from the damp and the weight above it, the features were unmistakable. The curly dark hair, the slim frame, a silver ring still on one finger. Kyle Mercer had been found, but the case wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The discovery of Kyle Mercer's body changed everything. The quiet search had officially become a homicide investigation. Forensic teams worked through the night, carefully removing the tarp, photographing the burial site, and cataloging every object found in the shed. The air was thick with damp soil and something more sinister. Finality. No more hoping he had run off, no more wondering if he might return. Kyle was dead, and he hadn't left of his own accord. The autopsy confirmed what Clara Riths had already feared. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. The angle and depth of the wounds suggested a heavy, narrow object, something like a hammer. There were no defensive injuries, no signs of a struggle beyond the impact. He hadn't seen it coming. Back at the estate, the search expanded beyond the garden. Detectives scoured the house with renewed intensity. Every drawer, closet, and hidden corner was examined. In the flower bed behind the shed, buried just beneath the roots of a withered rosebush, they found a blood-stained antique hammer. Its handle was cracked, but the head was intact. The blood matched Kyle's, and a partial fingerprint was lifted from the wooden grip. It wasn't Denise. The print belonged to Patrick Doyle, her third husband, legally declared missing in 2010, presumed dead after a house fire in 2000. But now 10 years later, his fingerprint had surfaced on the very weapon used to kill Kyle Mercer. The implications were staggering. If the fingerprint was recent, it suggested Patrick hadn't died in the fire, but if it was old, left years ago before the hammer had ever been used in a crime, it meant only one thing: the weapon had been in Denise's possession for a very long time, waiting. Clara didn't confront Denise immediately. Instead she watched. Denise's demeanor remained eerily steady. She expressed mild shock when told Kyle's body had been found, murmured that she just wanted closure. Her eyes never welled with tears, her voice never trembled. If grief lived inside her, it had built itself a fortress. As the house was combed for more clues, investigators noticed something odd in the office upstairs. A locked drawer in Denise's desk, which she claimed held old tax records, was missing. The entire drawer removed, not just empty. Clara ordered a search of the attic and found it tucked behind boxes of vintage china. Inside were dozens of documents, some old letters, others financial statements, but the most chilling item was a list, handwritten in careful looping script. 5 names, all men, 4 crossed out: Thomas Avery, Marcus Lyle, Patrick Doyle, Victor Kincaid. The 5th name was Kyle Mercer. Next to his name was a date, October 4, the day he died. Clara folded the paper slowly, each crease sharp and deliberate. The list wasn't just a record, it was a timeline, a plan. And if Denise had planned Kyle's death, she had likely planned the others too. Finally, with evidence piling high and the body confirmed, an arrest warrant was issued. Officers arrived at the estate just after sunrise. Denise was in the sunroom watering plants. She didn't resist. She didn't ask questions. She simply turned, placed the watering can down on a table and extended her wrists. The town of Ashridge watched in stunned silence as she was led away in handcuffs. Reporters flooded in. Headlines blared phrases like "Black Widow of Ashridge" and "Bride Turned Killer." But beneath the sensationalism, one truth remained: Denise Waller had deceived, manipulated, and ultimately murdered. Kyle had suspected something. He had sensed the danger closing in. He had tried to understand who Denise really was, but by the time he uncovered the truth, it was already too late.
In the days following Denise Waller's arrest, the town of Ashridge transformed from a quiet, half-forgotten place into a hotbed of national attention. Reporters camped outside the courthouse. News vans lined the roads. True crime bloggers and podcast hosts speculated wildly about her motives, the number of victims, and whether the deaths of her previous husbands would be officially reopened. But inside the investigation room, Detective Clara Reese wasn't focused on the noise. She wanted something concrete. The why. The motive, when it finally surfaced, was disturbingly simple. Money. Financial records recovered from Denise's office revealed a hidden world beneath the surface of her antiques empire. Despite the image of wealth and class she projected, Denise had been drowning in debt for years. Her store, once a local treasure, had been bleeding money. Property taxes had gone unpaid. 3 maxed-out credit cards sat hidden in her desk drawer. Her bank account had been dangerously close to empty. And then came the insurance policies. Every husband Denise had married, including Kyle, had a life insurance policy taken out shortly after the wedding, in some cases within days. Each policy followed the same structure: high payout, short-term coverage, with Denise listed as the sole beneficiary. Thomas Avery's policy paid out $250,000. Marcus Lyle's disappearance resulted in a disputed settlement, but Denise still walked away with over $1. Patrick Doyle's fire insurance payout was one of the largest, thanks to the house loss. Even Victor Kincaid's sudden illness had triggered a smaller payout through a supplemental life policy. But Kyle Mercer's was different. Only days before their wedding, Denise had taken him to sign a set of papers she described as basic legal stuff for taxes. Kyle, young and overwhelmed, hadn't questioned it. He signed everything without reading. One of those documents had been a $500. Denise filed it under her business account, masking it from public records. The paperwork had cleared just 1 day before Kyle was murdered. The timing was not a coincidence, it was a countdown. Clara dug deeper, curious about whether Kyle had known anything about the policy. In his apartment above the auto shop, tucked between stacks of mechanic manuals, she found his personal journal. Most entries were routine notes about work, errands, random thoughts. But a week before the wedding, one short sentence stood out. "I think she's hiding something big." The note matched Tanner's memory of Kyle growing anxious in the days leading up to the wedding. He hadn't just been suspicious. He had been afraid. Clara now believed Kyle was trying to piece it together on his own, following a trail he didn't fully understand. He had found old receipts, unfamiliar names and fragments of letters she had kept locked away. He was starting to see the pattern, but he didn't have time to finish the puzzle. When confronted with the financial evidence, Denise said nothing. During her interrogation she sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, eyes unmoving. She neither confirmed nor denied the motives presented. She simply asked for a lawyer. But the silence only made things worse. At the pre-trial hearing, the prosecution laid out the paper trail: the rapid-fire marriage, the immediate insurance enrollment, the calculated disposal of Kyle's body, and the eerie list of former husbands. The judge denied bail. Denise was to remain in custody until the trial began. Public opinion turned sharply against her. Former customers stopped by the now shuttered antique store just to stare. Old acquaintances told stories they'd previously ignored about Denise's coldness, her way of making people feel small, her sharp knowledge of estate law and insurance loopholes. For years she had been hiding in plain sight, wearing the mask of a sophisticated widow, but behind it was something ruthless, methodical, and patient. She hadn't married for love, she had married for opportunity. And Kyle, the youngest, the quietest, and perhaps the most trusting of them all, had been her final mistake. The trial of Denise Waller drew nationwide attention. The courthouse was packed daily. Journalists, local residents, and curious strangers squeezed into the gallery, all hungry to witness the final chapter of the chilling saga that had haunted Ashridge. Prosecutors called it one of the most calculated cases of serial domestic homicide in the state's history. Denise's face appeared on every television screen, every online headline, her expression forever frozen in that unsettling calm that never cracked. Not during her arrest, not during the discovery of Kyle's body, and not even as the mountain of evidence rose against her. Tanner Wells took the stand on the third day of testimony. He spoke with quiet fury, recounting Kyle's final weeks, the late-night confession, the growing fear, the photograph hidden in the locker. His voice broke only once, when he said, "He tried to get out. He didn't realize how little time he had." The courtroom fell silent, heavy with the weight of loss and betrayal. Lena Ford followed, presenting the recovered security footage. Though grainy and silent, the video of Kyle's final moments hit the room like a cold wind. The figure dragging his limp body into the shadows was faceless, but unmistakable in intention. Prosecutors connected the timeline precisely: the hammer found buried in the garden, the bloody boot, the insurance policy activated just 24 hours. Piece by piece they constructed a story of premeditation so methodical it bordered on chilling artistry. Then came Detective Clara Rice, detailing the entire investigation from the first missing persons report to the shed where Kyle had been found. She walked the jury through the list discovered in Denise's office, the eerie roll call of dead husbands, with Kyle's name written last, followed by the date of his death. It was planned, she said simply, not in the moment, not in anger, planned like a business transaction. The defense had little to offer. They leaned heavily on character witnesses, painting Denise as a misunderstood woman, a victim of public bias and circumstantial evidence, but the weight of the facts was too great. No matter how elegant she appeared, how calm her demeanor, there was no denying the horror buried beneath her garden, and the pattern of men who had vanished before Kyle. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilt on all counts: first-degree murder, insurance fraud, and obstruction of justice. The sentence was life without parole. But the story didn't end with the verdict. A year after Denise was transferred to a maximum security prison, workers were sent to demolish parts of her crumbling estate. The plan was to gut the property and resell the land, hoping to erase the dark legacy attached to it. During excavation near the far edge of the garden, where thick ivy had overrun a stone walkway, workers hit something hard just beneath the soil. It wasn't rock, it was bone. Police were called immediately. A full forensic excavation followed. What they uncovered were partial human remains, fractured, decayed and scattered in layers. Dental records confirmed the identity: Patrick Doyle, the third husband, the man believed to have died in a house fire. The revelation shook Ashridge to its core. Denise hadn't just outlived her husbands, she had buried them, hidden them, erased them, and the full extent of her crimes had yet to be known. Back in prison, when asked about the discovery, Denise offered no response. She simply turned away, her expression unreadable. She never confessed. She never denied. She simply vanished from the public eye, as if retreating into the same shadows where her victims had been lost. Kyle Mercer had been her last victim, but not the only one. The truth had been buried deeper than anyone imagined, and even now, long after the verdict, investigators believed there might still be more beneath the soil, more names never written down, more lives stolen in silence. Ashridge would never forget the woman who wore grief like a veil, and used marriage as a weapon.